Hi there, welcome to Hushed History Channel. Tonight we're going to discover why your romantic fantasies about Viking raiders would end with you face down in the North Sea before lunch. Picture this. You're shivering in the pre-dawn darkness of 9th century Norway, your breath forming clouds in the frigid air as massive, scarred warriors prepare for a raid that you, with your soft modern sensibilities, are definitely not ready for. That horned helmet from the movies. Yeah, that's the least of your problems when you can't even figure out which end of the battle axe to hold. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment letting me know where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love seeing how far these bedtime stories travel. Now, close your eyes and listen. The first thing that hits you isn't the cold, though at negative 10 degrees Celsius, that's certainly competing for your attention. No, it's the smell. Imagine 40 unwashed bodies crammed into a longhouse for months, mixed with smoke from the central fire pit, rotting fish, and what historians delicately call human waste. Your modern nose, accustomed to deodorant and daily showers, immediately rebels. You gag, which wakes up Bjorn next to you, who responds by elbowing you hard in the ribs and muttering something that sounds distinctly threatening in Old Norse. The longhouse is nothing like those cozy Viking halls you've seen on TV. Water drips steadily through gaps in the turf roof, forming icy puddles on the packed earth floor. You're lying on what passes for a bed, a narrow wooden bench covered with a flea-infested sheepskin that's seen better decades. Around you, warriors are beginning to stir, and the sounds they make are disturbing. Coughing that rattles with what's probably tuberculosis, the scratch of lice being picked from beards, and the splash of someone using the communal bucket in the corner, because nobody's walking to the outdoor latrine in this weather. Your fellow raiders range from teenagers with patchy beards to grizzled veterans missing various body parts. There's Ulf One-Eye, who lost the other one to a Frankish spear, and now claims he can see into the spirit world. There's young Magnus, maybe 14, who keeps sharpening his grandfather's sword with religious dedication, trying to hide how his hands shake. The social dynamics here are nothing like your office politics. These men have been killing together since before they could properly grow facial hair. As you struggle to sit up, your back screaming from the unforgiving wooden surface, you notice everyone's moving with practiced efficiency despite the early hour. They've done this hundreds of times. The weak dawn light filtering through the smoke hole reveals scarred faces set with grim determination. Someone kicks a dog that's gotten too close to the weapons pile. Another man is already checking the leather straps on his shield, fingers moving with muscle memory in the dim light. The historical records don't really capture what it's like to wake up for a raid. The sagas talk about glory and gold, but they skip over how your hands are so cold you can barely feel them, or how your stomach is already churning with a combination of hunger and pure terror. Archaeologists have found evidence of severe arthritis in Viking skeletons, probably from exactly these conditions: sleeping in the damp, rowing in the cold, living hard and dying young. Most of these men won't see 40. You reach for your belongings, such as they are, your sword, if you can call the notched, poorly balanced blade that leans against the wall. It's already showing spots of rust because you forgot to oil it last night. The other Vikings notice, of course. Everything here is about reputation, and yours is already taking hits. Someone makes a joke in Old Norse that you don't understand, but from the laughter, you know it's at your expense. The worst part? This is the easy bit. You haven't even gotten to the actual raiding yet. As you fumble in the dark for your boots, stiff with dried salt water and probably containing at least one angry spider, you hear the warband's leader, Sigurd Bloodaxe, and yes, that's his real name, earned after he split a Saxon's skull clean in half. Bark orders. Time to get moving. Time to face the kind of breakfast that would make a prison meal look like fine dining. Sigurd's bark sends everyone scrambling toward the central fire pit where breakfast, and you use that term loosely, awaits. Your stomach, already queasy from the smells and the early hour, does a little flip when you see what's on the menu. The main course is something the Vikings call screed, cod that's been hung outside to dry in the winter air until it has the consistency of wood and smells like death warmed over. The women of the household, who've been up even earlier than the warriors, are attempting to reconstitute it in lukewarm water, creating a grey, fishy soup that would make a starving person think twice. But wait, it gets better, or worse, depending on your perspective. The bread, if you can call these rock-hard discs bread, is made from barley, rye, and whatever else they could scrape together, including ground peas and sometimes tree bark when times were tough. You pick up a piece and it actually clinks against your wooden bowl. Someone passes you a chunk of butter, except it's been stored in a bog for preservation and tastes like someone mixed regular butter with soil and sadness. The Vikings consider this a delicacy. Your modern palate considers it a war crime. The real treat this morning is the fermented fish paste called surströmming's ancestor. Historians still argue whether the Vikings invented this particular form of culinary torture or if it evolved later, but something very similar was definitely on the menu. It's herring that's been fermented just shy of becoming completely rotten, creating a smell so powerful that even these hardened warriors eat it quickly and try not to breathe through their noses. One of the younger raiders actually runs outside to vomit, which earns him merciless teasing and a new nickname that probably translates to weak stomach. You force yourself to eat because you know you'll need the energy. The seasickness hasn't even started yet. That joy awaits you on the longship. For now, you're dealing with regular nausea as you chew bread that threatens to crack your teeth and wash it down with ale that's more water than alcohol, flavored with bog myrtle and juniper. At least the ale is slightly safer than the water, which comes from a well that's uncomfortably close to where they dump the waste. Around you, the other Vikings are wolfing down their portions with apparent relish, sopping up the fish liquid with their rock bread and gnawing on strips of dried meat that could be anything from reindeer to horse to last week's unsuccessful raider. They eat with their hands and personal knives, the same knives they'll later use to separate Saxons from their valuables and possibly their lives. Table manners here consist mainly of not stabbing the person next to you while reaching for more food. The social aspect of breakfast is just as challenging as the food itself. Conversations flow in Old Norse, peppered with inside jokes about previous raids and casual discussions of violence that make you realize these people have a very different relationship with death than you do. They're comparing scars, talking about who owes whom blood money for past injuries, and making bets on who'll claim the first kill today. The casualness of it all is deeply unsettling. You notice the portion sizes are carefully controlled, not because anyone's watching their weight. Body fat is actually prized here as a sign of wealth and survival ability, but because resources are scarce. Every bite has been calculated to last through the winter, and raiding is as much about desperation as it is about glory. These people are literally eating tree bark bread because the alternative is starvation. It puts that whole Vikings were just greedy pirates narrative in a different perspective. One of the older warriors, noticing your struggle with the food, laughs and tells you about his first raid. Apparently, he spent the entire journey hanging over the side of the longship, earning the nickname Olaf the Green. The fact that he's still here, 30 years and countless raids later, should be encouraging. Instead, you notice he's missing 3 fingers, most of his teeth, and has a scar that runs from his ear to his collarbone. Survival, it seems, comes at a price. The women are already preparing for the men's departure, packing extra provisions for the journey. These include more of that delightful dried fish, some barely edible cheese that's been preserved in whey, and flatbread that will somehow become even harder over the course of the voyage. They also pack medicinal herbs, yarrow for wounds, willow bark for pain, and various mushrooms that serve purposes you'd rather not think about. The fact that they're pre-packing medical supplies tells you everything you need to know about how this day is likely to go. As breakfast winds down, you realize you've managed to choke down maybe half your portion. Your modern stomach, accustomed to processed foods and regulated temperatures, is in full revolt. But there's no time to coddle your digestive system. Sigurd is already heading for the door, and the scramble to finish eating and gather weapons begins. You stuff the remaining bread in your pouch, knowing you'll probably regret not eating more later, and steel yourself for what comes next, trying to dress yourself in enough layers and armor to survive both the elements and enemy weapons. The armor situation is where your Viking fantasy really starts to crumble. First, you need to put on your base layers, and in 9th century Scandinavia, that means wool. Not the nice, soft merino wool of your hiking gear. This is coarse, scratchy wool that's been minimally processed and still smells distinctly of sheep. You pull on wool trousers that immediately make your skin itch, followed by a wool tunic that reaches your knees. Over this goes another wool tunic because hypothermia is a more immediate threat than sword wounds on the North Sea. Now comes the fun part, the chainmail. If you're lucky enough to have chainmail, and that's a big if, since a good burnie costs about the same as a small farm, you're looking at 30 to 40 pounds of interlocked iron rings. Yours is a hand-me-down that's seen better decades, with rust spots and several patches where rings have been hastily replaced with whatever metal was available. The Vikings call it ring woven, which sounds poetic until you try to lift it over your head and realize it's like wearing a sack of cold, wet chains. Getting into chainmail alone is basically impossible, so you need help from Magnus, who snickers at your technique. There's an art to it. You bunch it up, duck your head through, and let gravity do the work while trying not to catch your ears or beard in the rings. Of course, you don't have a proper beard yet, which marks you as either very young or very foreign. The mail immediately settles on your shoulders like the world's worst weighted blanket, and you haven't even added the belt yet. The belt is crucial. Without it, all that weight hangs from your shoulders and you'll be exhausted before you even reach the ship. Vikings wear their belts tight around the waist to distribute the load, along with various pouches. Your eating knife, maybe a lucky charm or two. Yours includes a small Thor's hammer pendant that you bought from a sketchy merchant who swore it was blessed by a real Gothi. The other raiders wear arm rings of silver and gold. But these aren't just jewelry. They're portable wealth. Hack silver that can be chopped off and used as currency. You have one pathetic copper ring that's already turning your wrist green. Your helmet, if you can call it that, is a simple iron cap with a nasal guard. No horns. That's a Victorian myth that would have gotten you killed in real combat. The inside is padded with wool that's absorbed years of other people's sweat, creating a unique aroma that makes you gag. It doesn't fit quite right, sliding forward over your eyes when you bend down, but it's better than taking an axe to the skull. Some of the richer warriors have spectacle helms or chainmail aventails. But you're stuck with basic head protection. That's one good blow away from becoming a very uncomfortable crown. The shield is where things get really interesting. Viking shields aren't the heavy, metal-bound things you see in movies. They're made of planks of linden or pine, covered in leather or rawhide, with an iron boss in the center. Yours has definitely seen better days, with several planks that have been replaced and a lovely crack running through the middle that someone's tried to fix with hide glue and hope. It's painted with what might have once been a fearsome design, but now looks like a drowned cat. You test the grip and realize your soft, modern hands are going to be hamburger meat after a day of holding this thing. For weapons, you have your poorly maintained sword and a hand axe that's more tool than weapon. The real Vikings carry an arsenal, throwing spears, specialized battle axes, saxes, large fighting knives, and some even have bows. They wear their weapons with practiced ease, while you keep getting your sword scabbard tangled between your legs. You've already tripped it twice just walking around the longhouse. And the snickers from the other raiders suggest this is going to be a long day. The final touches are just as important as the armor. You need a wool cloak, fastened with a bronze brooch at the shoulder, except yours is iron because bronze is for people who've actually succeeded at raiding. Wool mittens that make gripping anything an adventure. Leather boots that are already taking on water from the muddy floor. And if you're really unlucky, wool leg wraps that need to be wound from ankle to knee in a specific pattern that you absolutely cannot master. As you stand there, sweating under 40 pounds of metal and wool despite the freezing temperature, you realize something crucial. This is the light traveling gear. Some warriors are wearing lamella armor, carrying multiple spears, bringing tools for breaking down doors. One entrepreneurial soul has a grappling hook. Another has what looks suspiciously like a portable battering ram. These people aren't just raiders, they're walking siege engines. The irony of those arm rings becomes clear now. They're not just decoration or portable wealth, they're also one of the few bits of metal on your body that won't rust. Unlike your chainmail, which requires constant maintenance with sand and vinegar. You watch Ulf One-Eye oil his mail with seal fat, a process that makes it marginally more flexible, but adds another layer to the overall stench. Your own mail is already starting to chafe through the wool layers, and you haven't even started moving yet. The march to the longship is when reality really sets in. You're trudging through knee-deep mud, carrying weapons, supplies, and wearing enough metal to stock a small blacksmith shop. Every step is a struggle as your boots squelch and slip, and that chainmail that felt heavy in the longhouse now feels like you're carrying another person on your shoulders. The other Vikings move with practiced ease, laughing and joking as they navigate the treacherous path to the fjord. You're wheezing like an asthmatic walrus, and you haven't even reached the boat yet. The longship appears through the morning mist like something from a nightmare. 70 feet of oak planking, with the iconic dragon head mounted on the prow, except this one looks more like a diseased dog after years of weather damage. The ship sits low in the water, which should have been your first clue about what's coming. There are no seats, just wooden chests that double as rowing benches, and definitely no bathroom facilities unless you count the side of the ship and whatever dignity you can maintain while 40 other men watch. Boarding is an adventure in itself. There's no convenient gangplank. You wade through freezing water up to your thighs, trying to keep your weapons dry while waves knock you sideways. Your chainmail, already heavy, now has the added bonus of being wet, which makes it roughly as comfortable as wearing a suit made of ice-cold pennies. You haul yourself over the side, graceless as a seal on land, while the veterans leap aboard like they were born to it. The rowing positions are assigned by seniority and skill, which puts you right in the middle where you can do the least damage, but have to work the hardest. You settle onto your sea chest, grab the oar, a 14-foot monster of solid pine that weighs more than a modern barbell, and immediately realize your gym membership prepared you for exactly nothing. The oar handles are smooth from years of use, which sounds nice until you realize that means there's no grip, and your soft hands are about to become a case study in advanced blister formation. Sigurd shouts the command to row, and 40 oars hit the water with practiced precision, except yours, which you manage to catch on the oar in front of you, nearly smacking Magnus in the head. The rhythm is brutal. Pull, lift, forward, drop, pull, over and over, with the North Sea fighting you every stroke. Within minutes, your hands are screaming. Within 10 minutes, you can feel the blisters forming. Within 20 minutes, those blisters have burst and you're rowing with raw flesh. The Vikings have a solution for this. They piss on their hands. No, really. The urea supposedly helps toughen the skin, though historians still argue whether this was actually effective or just another way Vikings established dominance through being utterly disgusting. Either way, when Bjorn notices your pathetic whimpering and offers to help by urinating on your palms, you're faced with a choice that no amount of historical reenactment prepared you for. The physical torture of rowing is only part of the nightmare. The longship, for all its elegant design, handles waves about as well as a log. It flexes and twists with each swell, water sloshing over the sides with alarming regularity. There's a kid whose only job is bailing, and he's losing. Your feet are sitting in several inches of frigid seawater, mixed with whatever else has accumulated in the bilge. And given the bathroom situation, you don't want to think too hard about what else. The seated position is murder on your back. You're bent forward, pulling with all your might, while your spine screams protest and your shoulders burn. The Vikings row in shifts, but as the new guy, you're expected to prove yourself. This means rowing until you literally cannot lift the oar anymore, at which point you'll be mocked for weakness and allowed a brief rest before being expected to go again. The concept of pacing yourself is apparently for farmers and Christian monks. Speaking of Christian monks, that's where you're headed. The navigation is being handled by Eric the Wayfinder, who's using a combination of sun position, wave patterns, and what appears to be pure intuition to guide you towards some unfortunate monastery on the English coast. There's no compass. Those won't reach Europe for another 2 centuries. Instead, he's got a sun shadow board and the kind of inherited knowledge that comes from generations of people who use the sea as their highway. Your worldview of Vikings as fearsome warriors is taking a beating as you watch half the crew succumb to seasickness. Apparently, even experienced raiders never quite get used to the North Sea's particular brand of choppy hell. The smell of vomit mixes with the general stench of unwashed bodies and bilge water, creating an atmosphere that makes your breakfast's reappearance seem inevitable. You're trying to row while your stomach does gymnastics, and every pull of the oar brings a fresh wave of nausea. The worst part, this is good weather. Ulf One Eye helpfully mentions that last year they got caught in a storm and spent 3 days rowing for their lives while waves crashed over the Dragonhead. 2 men were washed overboard. They didn't turn back for them. The sea takes what it wants, he says with the casual fatalism of someone who's accepted that death is always one wave away. Your modern sensibilities, with their Coast Guard rescues and GPS emergency beacons, are having a very hard time with this information. 3 hours into the voyage, And you've discovered why Vikings had such a reputation for being absolutely feral when they hit land. They were probably just desperate to get off these floating torture chambers. The bathroom situation has moved from theoretical problem to urgent crisis. Your modern bladder, accustomed to convenient facilities and privacy, is now faced with the Viking solution. Hang your ass over the side and hope for the best. The technical term is using the head, because you go to the front, head, of the ship, where there's slightly less chance of the wind blowing things back at you, slightly. You watch in horror as Bjorn demonstrates the technique, casually dropping his trousers and balancing on the gunwale while the ship rocks violently. One hand grips the rigging, the other holds his tunic up, and he's carrying on a conversation about wind patterns while conducting his business. The spray from the waves adds an extra element of adventure to the whole process. When your turn comes, and it will come, because that fermented fish is doing terrible things to your intestines, you discover muscles you didn't know you had, gripping the wet rigging while squatting over churning water, trying to maintain balance while the ship pitches and rolls, all while 40 other men either politely ignore you or offer helpful commentary about your technique. There's no toilet paper, obviously. You get a communal rag on a stick that's been rinsed in seawater. Maybe the same seawater that just splashed up and gave you an unexpected bidet experience that makes you yelp in shock. But here's where it gets really special. Solid waste management. The Vikings. Practical as always. Just let it fall into the sea. Except when the wind is wrong, or when the waves are high, or when your aim is off because a particularly large swell hits just as you're committed to the process. Some of the younger raiders have developed a competitive element to it, seeing who can manage the feat in the roughest weather. You are not winning any prizes. The close quarters make everything worse. 40+ men, crammed into a space smaller than a modern city bus, all dealing with the same biological needs. The smell would be unbearable if the sea spray wasn't constantly washing over everything, which creates its own problems. Salt water in every crevice of your body is a unique form of torture. Your chainmail is now so encrusted with salt that it's actively abrading your skin through the wool. Every movement sounds like you're wearing a suit made of sandpaper. Historians still argue whether Viking ships carried barrels for fresh water or if they relied on stopping frequently for resupply. Your ship has 2 small casks, but they're strictly rationed. You get maybe a cup a day, which isn't nearly enough when you're rowing this hard. Some of the men supplement with weak ale, but that just makes the bathroom situation worse. Others have learned to catch rainwater in their helmets, though given the general hygiene standards, drinking from your helmet seems like a fast track to dysentery. The social dynamics of bathroom breaks reveal the strict hierarchy aboard. Sigurd and the senior warriors go whenever they please. Everyone else has to wait for rowing breaks or risk abandoning their oar at a crucial moment. You've already earned glares for having to stop mid-stroke, your bladder overruling your desire to fit in. The young ones like Magnus have iron bladders born from years of training. You have the bladder of someone who's used to hitting the restroom every time they finish a latte. Medical issues compound the problem. Several of the men are dealing with what's politely called the flux, probably from that questionable breakfast or the dodgy water back home. Watching someone try to manage explosive diarrhea while hanging off a moving longship in the North Sea is something that really puts your own problems in perspective. There's a reason Vikings valued constipation on voyages, and it's not because they enjoyed the discomfort. The women who occasionally travelled on these ships had it even worse, though that's not your problem today. They'd have to manage all this while wearing long dresses and maintaining whatever modesty was possible in a culture that was pretty casual about bodily functions, but still had some boundaries. The logistics alone make you grateful you're just dealing with trousers, even if they are now soaked with seawater and chafing in places you didn't know could chafe. Then there's the vomiting, so much vomiting. The combination of rowing motion, wave action, and general misery means someone is always hanging over the side, adding their breakfast to Neptune's realm. The experienced sailors have designated vomit spots based on wind patterns. You haven't learned these yet, which is why you're now wearing some of Magnus's recycled fish paste. He apologizes, but you can see he's also filing this away as something to mock you about later. The real Vikings developed iron stomachs and sphincters of steel out of pure necessity. They could row for hours without break, manage their bodily functions in impossible conditions, and somehow maintain enough dignity to be terrifying when they hit shore. You're beginning to understand why they were so eager to raid. After days of this, pillaging a monastery probably felt like a spa day. At least monasteries had latrines, real, actual latrines with walls and privacy and no risk of falling into the North Sea mid-movement. As you settle back onto your rowing bench, trying to ignore the salt burns in unfortunate places and the fact that your hands are now just raw meat wrapped around an oar handle, you realize this is still the easy part. You're not even halfway to England yet, and already your body is falling apart in ways you didn't know were possible. The sun is high now, what passes for noon on the North Sea, and you've just made your first major social error. In your exhaustion, you collapsed onto the wrong sea chest. Thorstein's spot, apparently, and from the way he's looming over you with his hand on his seax, this is not a minor faux pas. The seating arrangement on a Viking longship isn't random. It's a complex social map that reflects years of raiding history, blood debts, alliances, and that time someone stole someone else's favorite wheatstone. Thorstein is explaining, in very simple Old Norse that even you can understand, that this particular spot has been his since the raid on Lindisfarne in 93. Not 1993, 793. His father rode here, and his father's father. And if you don't move right now, your father will be rowing here next year because you'll be feeding the fishes. The other Vikings watch with interest, but don't intervene. This is between you and Thorstein, and how you handle it will determine whether you spend the rest of this voyage as that idiot who sat in Thorstein's spot, or that idiot who sat in Thorstein's spot and then cried about it. You scramble away, mumbling apologies, and search for another bench. But every spot has a similar history, similar invisible boundaries. Finally, Ulf One-Eye takes pity and points to a chest near the stern, right next to where they store the extra rope and what smells like rotting seal meat. It's the worst spot on the ship, maximum spray, minimum protection, and definitely where they put the people nobody wants to sit near. Welcome to your new home. The social hierarchy extends beyond just seating. There's an intricate system of who eats first. Sigurd and his inner circle. Who gets the best portions of the terrible food, not you. And who has to help with the worst jobs, definitely you. When the sail needs adjusting, guess who's climbing the wet rigging in full chainmail? When someone needs to check if that floating log is actually a log or a dead body, guess who's leaning precariously over the side with a boat hook? You're beginning to understand that Viking society is built on reputation, and yours is somewhere between useless and actively hazardous. Every mistake is remembered, catalogued, and will be brought up in increasingly creative skaldic verses. Bjorn has already composed a little ditty about your rowing technique that rhymes oar with whore in Old Norse, which is apparently hilarious because everyone's been singing it for the last hour. The pecking order determines everything from who gets to sharpen their weapons on the good whetstone. There's apparently a good one and a bad one, and you're not experienced enough to tell the difference. To who stands where during the pre-raid prayers. You're so far down the hierarchy that when they pass around the ceremonial drinking horn, it's empty by the time it reaches you. You mime drinking from it anyway, because not participating would be even worse for your already abysmal reputation. The veterans tell stories to pass the time, and these reveal even more about the complex social web you've stumbled into. There are blood feuds spanning generations. Eric won't speak to Hakon because Hakon's uncle killed Eric's cousin over a disputed sheep 20 years ago. There are sworn brothers who've mixed blood and share everything, including guilt for crimes and responsibility for revenge. There are men who've been outlawed from Norway and are here because raiding is literally their only option for survival. You learn that your pathetic copper arm ring marks you as not just poor, but as someone who hasn't proven himself worthy of real payment. The silver and gold the others wear represents successful raids. Blood spilled, monasteries pillaged. Each ring tells a story, and yours says, I bought this from a merchant and have never actually killed anyone. The weight of their jewelry is a physical reminder of their status. The absence of weight on your arms is a reminder of yours. The intimidation tactics start subtle and get progressively worse. Someone accidentally knocks your water ration overboard. Your bread mysteriously gets soaked with seawater. Your sleeping fur, which you need for the cold nights, develops a tear that definitely wasn't there before. When you complain, you're told these things happen at sea. Toughen up. Stop whining like a Christian priest. Then there's the language barrier. Old Norse is complex, full of kennings and poetic circumlocutions that assume vast cultural knowledge. When someone says feed the eagles, they mean killing enemies. Wave horse means ship. Wound sea means blood. You're constantly 3 metaphors behind in every conversation, which makes you seem even more stupid than your physical incompetence suggests. They've started speaking slowly to you, using simple words, like you're a particularly dim child. The jokes get darker as the day wears on. They start asking if you know which end of the sword to hold, whether you've ever actually seen blood that wasn't your own, from your destroyed hands, whether your mother knows you're out past your bedtime. Each joke is a test. Laugh along and you're weak. Get angry and you're weak. Try to joke back and you'll probably mess up the language and be weak and stupid. But the real moment of truth comes when Sigurd announces it's time to practice combat formations. On a moving ship, in chainmail, with real weapons, because apparently, Vikings believe in training like you fight. And if someone gets accidentally stabbed during practice, well, better to find out they're weak now than during the actual raid. You watch the others pair off with the enthusiasm of someone being asked to volunteer for dental surgery, knowing that whatever happens next is going to hurt and there's absolutely nothing you can do about it. The pre-raid preparations begin as the English coast appears as a dark smudge on the horizon. Suddenly, the lazy afternoon atmosphere transforms into something electric and terrifying. Warriors are checking weapons, tightening straps, and most disturbingly, preparing for the berserker ritual. You thought berserkers were just myth and exaggeration. You thought wrong. Ragnar Bearshirt, and yes, that's literally what his name means, starts the preparation. He produces a leather pouch from his chest and begins distributing small, dried mushrooms to a select group of warriors. Historians still argue whether these were Amanita muscaria or just regular psychoactive mushrooms, but watching Ragnar chew them with reverent concentration while muttering prayers to Odin makes the academic debate feel very distant. His eyes are already starting to dilate, and he's begun the rhythmic breathing that apparently helps the mushrooms kick in faster. The blood oath ceremony is next, and as the new guy, you're expected to participate. Sigurd draws his knife across his palm with casual efficiency, letting blood drip into a carved wooden bowl. Each warrior follows suit, adding their blood to the mix while swearing oaths that sound absolutely binding, even though you only understand every third word. When it's your turn, your hand shakes so badly that you barely nick the skin. The pitiful drops that fall into the bowl earn you yet another round of mockery. But at least you're bleeding. That's progress? The religious elements are more complex than you expected. It's not just praise Odin and charge. There are specific rituals for specific gods. Thor for strength in battle, Odin for victory and wisdom, Freya for good weather, and Ran to please the sea goddess so she doesn't claim anyone today. Some warriors have personal devotions to lesser-known deities. One man is painting runes on his shield while chanting something about Tyr. Another is tying feathers to his spear for reasons that probably make sense if you understand ancient Germanic paganism. You're handed a drinking horn filled with something that burns like liquid fire and tastes like fermented hatred. The mead is special, apparently blessed by a Volva, Ceres, back home, and guaranteed to give you the fury of the inner jar in battle. What it actually gives you is immediate heartburn and the growing certainty that you're going to die today. Everyone drinks deeply, so you do too, trying not to cough as it sears down your throat. The berserkers are starting to show effects now. Ragnar has stripped to the waist despite the cold, his pupils blown wide and his breathing coming in animal-like pants. He's begun hitting himself, working up to the battle fury that will supposedly make him immune to pain and fear. 2 other berserkers have joined him, and they're engaging in what looks like competitive self-harm, seeing who can get their blood up fastest. The regular warriors give them space, apparently. Pre-berserk berserkers have poor target discrimination. Weapons are being blessed now. Men pour ale over their blade edges, asking for good hunting. Others are rubbing their weapons with what looks like grave dirt, apparently from the burial mound of a famous warrior, though you suspect it might just be regular dirt with good marketing. Your own sword gets a half-hearted splash of whatever's left in someone's drinking horn, which is probably more blessing than it deserves given its condition. The really unsettling part is the scalp-taking discussion. They're quite casual about it, discussing the best techniques for removing a good trophy while keeping the hair intact. Someone produces a special knife just for scalping, lovingly maintained and decorated with little silver rivets. The Christians wear their hair in that distinctive tonsure, someone explains, which makes for disappointing trophies. Better to go for the warriors if you want something worth bragging about. You nod along like this is perfectly reasonable advice and not something from your worst nightmares. Then there's the divination. Eric throws carved wooden lots to see what the gods say about today's raid. The way they fall apparently indicates moderate success with some casualties. Everyone seems fine with this except you. Some casualties could very well mean you, but questioning the lots would be blasphemy, and you're already on thin ice. So you nod grimly like you too are totally comfortable with the gods playing dice with your life. The psychological preparation is fascinating and terrifying. Some warriors go quiet, entering an almost meditative state. Others work themselves up with boasts and challenges, claiming the first kill or the best loot. The berserkers are now in full flow. Ragnar is literally foaming at the mouth and making sounds that don't seem entirely human. His friends are having to physically restrain him from attacking the mast. This is apparently normal and even desirable. Your own preparation consists mainly of trying not to vomit from nerves. When someone hands you a piece of whale blubber to rub on your exposed skin, protection against the cold and weapons, supposedly, you comply even though it smells like rancid fish oil. Your hands shake as you try to remember which end of your sword is the pointy one. The upcoming violence feels both inevitable and impossible. These men are preparing to kill like you'd prepare for a difficult meeting at work. The final element is the war chants. Low, rhythmic, hypnotic. They build slowly, voices joining in harmonies that resonate in your chest, even not understanding the words. You feel the power of dozens of voices united in purpose. It's designed to build courage and intimidate enemies. And it's definitely working on at least half of that equation. As the English coast grows closer and the chanting grows louder, you realize there's no backing out now. You're about to participate in actual Viking violence, and your preparation consists of badly blessed weapons, a stomach full of fire mead, and the growing certainty that historical reenactment should have stayed historical. The approach to shore is chaos incarnate. Sigurd is screaming orders. The berserkers are screaming at their hallucinations, and you're just screaming internally as the longship surfs a wave straight toward the beach. The Vikings have timed this with the tide and local knowledge passed down through generations of raiders. But to you, it feels like barely controlled catastrophe. The ship hits the shallows at full speed, and suddenly everyone's moving. Move your worthless hide, Bjorn bellows in your ear as warriors leap over the sides into thigh-deep water. You fumble with your shield, get your sword tangled in your leg wraps, and finally tumble over the gunwale with all the grace of a sack of turnips. The cold water is shocking, but not as shocking as the fact that you immediately sink up to your waist in thick, sucking mud that seems determined to claim your boots as tribute. Your first step toward glory ends with you face-planting in the muck. The weight of your waterlogged chainmail drives you down, and for a horrifying moment, you're drowning in 3 feet of water while Vikings stream past you toward the beach. Someone, probably Magnus, bless his young heart, grabs your collar and hauls you upright. Your shield is somewhere in the mud, your helmet is askew, and you're coughing up a delightful mixture of seawater and sand. The beach assault is nothing like the organized landings you've seen in movies. It's 40-plus men stumbling through surf and mud, trying to maintain some semblance of formation while not tripping over driftwood, rocks, and each other. The berserkers have abandoned any pretense of tactics and are simply charging toward the tree line, howling like wounded animals. Ragnar appears to be fighting an invisible enemy, which would be funny if he wasn't swinging a very real axe very close to your head. You finally extract yourself from the mud, minus 1 boot, which the beach has claimed forever, and begin the world's most pathetic charge. Running in chainmail is hard. Running in chainmail through sand is harder. Running in chainmail through sand with 1 boot while trying to hold a sword you've never properly trained with is basically impossible. You're making about the same speed as a determined turtle, and probably look less threatening. The element of surprise everyone talked about is somewhat diminished by the fact that Thorstein trips over a piece of driftwood and crashes into 3 other warriors, creating a Viking domino effect. Someone's dog, why is there a dog on this raid, is barking excitedly and running in circles. 2 men are arguing about who gets to carry the banner. This is less devastating surprise attack, and more very dangerous circus has come to town. Your remaining boot finds a sharp rock, and you add your own yelp to the general cacophony. Hopping on one foot while wearing chainmail is a skill you haven't mastered, so you go down again. This time you land on your sword, which is fortunate because the scabbard prevents you from accidentally performing battlefield seppuku. Less fortunate is that you're now the only Viking attacking England while crawling. The monastery bells start ringing in the distance, so much for surprise, and you can see figures running along the cliff top. The Vikings respond with renewed enthusiasm, finally remembering they're supposed to be terrifying. Battle cries echo across the beach. Weapons are raised, and the charge resumes with slightly more coordination. You manage to get upright again, locate a shield, not yours, but possession is 9/10 of the law in Viking raids, and stumble after them. The incline from beach to monastery is steep and covered in loose shale. Your one-booted, one-socked approach to climbing proves even less effective than your beach charge. For every 2 steps forward, you slide 1 step back. Your bare foot is being shredded by rocks. Your chainmail is pulling you backward, and that borrowed shield is catching every gust of wind like a sail. Other Vikings power past you, sure-footed as mountain goats, while you're pioneering new ways to fail at basic locomotion. Then disaster strikes. Well, another disaster. Your sword, which you've been dragging more than carrying, catches between 2 rocks. Your momentum carries you forward. Physics takes over, and suddenly you're tumbling back down the hill in a clanking ball of metal and profanity. You bowl through a group of younger raiders who are actually making decent progress, taking them down like bowling pins. The veterans don't even look back. This is natural selection in action. By the time you stop rolling, you're back almost at the waterline, covered in sand, missing your helmet now too, and your borrowed shield is in 3 pieces. Your sword is still somewhere up the hill, stuck between those rocks like Excalibur, if Arthur had been really bad at his job. Ulf One-Eye pauses in his climb to look down at you, shakes his head with visible disappointment, and continues up the hill. Even the dog looks embarrassed for you. The sound of fighting has started above. The faster Vikings have reached the monastery walls. You can hear the clash of weapons, more screaming, though now it's not just Vikings doing it, and what sounds like Ragnar trying to headbutt through a wooden gate. You need to get up there. Not for glory now, but just to avoid the shame of being the only Viking to miss a raid because you couldn't walk up a hill. You start the climb again, barefoot now, because your remaining boot is more hindrance than help. Your chainmail has collected enough sand to qualify as a geological sample. You're using your hands as much as your feet, leaving bloody prints on the rocks, somewhere above. History is being made, down here. You're making a strong case for why Vikings usually left the farming to farmers and stuck to what they knew. By the time you finally crest the hill, the raid is in full swing, and you've missed the dramatic entrance entirely. The monastery's wooden gates are smashed open. Apparently Ragnar's head-butting technique worked, and Vikings are pouring through like ants at a picnic. You stumble toward the action, weaponless, helmetless, and with feet that look like you've been practicing firewalking on broken glass. Your first glimpse of actual medieval combat is nothing like the choreographed movie fights you expected. It's chaos, brutality, and surprisingly mundane. A monk runs past you screaming, chased by Thorstein, who seems more interested in the silver candlestick the monk is carrying than the monk himself. Another monk is trying to reason with Bjorn in Latin, which goes about as well as you'd expect when one party doesn't speak Latin and also doesn't care. You spot a weapon, a simple wooden staff dropped by a fleeing monk, and grab it. It's not exactly the tool of a Viking warrior, but it's better than your current armament of harsh language and hurt feelings. You follow the flow of raiders into the monastery proper, trying to look like you belong here and not like someone who just lost a fight with a beach. The scriptorium is your first stop, mainly because you get lost and blunder into it while looking for somewhere less terrifying. 3 Vikings are systematically destroying centuries of illuminated manuscripts, not out of cultural hatred, but because they're checking the bindings for hidden gold. Generations of scholarly work are being torn apart by men who can't read, but know that monks sometimes hide valuables in book covers. You watch in horror as a gorgeously illustrated gospel gets gutted like a fish. "Check for gold leaf," Eric shouts, noticing you standing there uselessly. He tosses you a half-destroyed manuscript. You catch it reflexively, staring at the intricate Celtic knotwork, the careful Latin script that took some monk probably years to complete. Then, Eric cuffs you upside the head and demonstrates how to properly destroy priceless cultural artifacts, rip the pages, check the binding, scrape off any gold, move on. Efficiency is key in pillaging. The Vikings' approach to looting is surprisingly organized. This isn't random destruction. It's systematic wealth extraction. They know exactly where monks hide valuables. Under altar stones, behind false walls, buried in the garden. One enterprising raider is literally taking apart the altar piece by piece, checking every joint for hidden compartments. Another is measuring walls, looking for spaces that don't add up. These aren't mindless barbarians. They're professional thieves with generations of experience. You're assigned to help strip the chapel, which means prying gems out of religious artwork with your eating knife, while trying not to think about the theological implications. A golden crucifix that probably took years to craft and represents centuries of devotion is reduced to portable wealth in minutes. The gems pop out surprisingly easily. Apparently Vikings have been doing this long enough to know exactly where to apply pressure. The monks are putting up less resistance than expected. Most fled at the first sign of longships, and the few that remained seem more interested in negotiating than fighting. One elderly monk is actually helping Sigurd locate the treasury, probably figuring cooperation might save some lives. He's explaining in broken Norse that the really valuable stuff was moved to a stronger monastery last month. Sigurd is not pleased. This is when you learn that easy target is relative. The monks might not be warriors, but they're also not completely helpless. One younger brother breaks free from his captors and manages to brain Hakon with a pewter chalice before being tackled. Another has barricaded himself in the bell tower and is pelting Vikings with roof tiles. The monastery's layout, designed for contemplation, is actually pretty defensible if you're creative. Your combat contribution comes when a monk, wild-eyed with terror, charges at you with a bread knife. Your extensive combat training, none, kicks in, and you respond by falling backward and wildly swinging your borrowed staff. By pure luck, you catch him in the stomach, and he doubles over wheezing. Before you can figure out what to do next, Magnus efficiently clubs him unconscious and gives you a thumbs up like you meant to do that. The systematic nature of the destruction is weirdly businesslike. Vikings are forming chains to pass loot to the ship, cataloguing finds, even arguing about fair distribution. Someone's keeping a tally on a piece of bark. The berserker fury has worn off, and now it's just professional raiders doing their jobs. They're leaving the buildings mostly intact. Burned monasteries can't be raided again next year. This is sustainable pillaging. The real disappointment sets in when the haul is assessed. This monastery has been hit before, probably multiple times. The gold is mostly gone. The silver is minimal. And the monks have gotten smart about hiding their wealth. What looked like easy pickings is turning out to be more like difficult gleanings. You've risked your life, destroyed your feet, lost most of your equipment, and your share might buy you a decent meal back home, maybe. As you help carry a sack of mixed metal items back toward the beach, candlesticks, a few plates, some coins that might be silver or might be pewter, you realize this is the reality of Viking raiding. Not glorious battle against worthy opponents, but systematically robbing religious communities who can't really fight back. The other Vikings seem fine with this. You're starting to understand why the sagas focus on the rare heroic battles and skip over the mundane monastery muggings. The rain starts just as you're hauling the disappointing loot back down to the beach. Not a gentle English drizzle, but a proper North Sea storm that turns the hillside into a mudslide and makes your chainmail feel like you're wearing a waterfall. Within minutes, your wool clothing has absorbed roughly its own weight in water, and that 30-pound burnie now feels like 50. Every step is a battle against gravity, mud, and your own rapidly deteriorating equipment. Your bare feet, already shredded from the climb up, are now trying to find purchase on slopes that have become vertical streams. You're carrying a sack of candlesticks that keep shifting, throwing off your balance. Ahead of you, Bjorn loses his footing and slides 20 feet on his backside, somehow managing to keep his loot bag elevated like a Viking waterslide champion. You're not so lucky. Your first fall sends silver plates scattering across the hillside, and you spend precious minutes crawling through mud to retrieve them while rain pounds your back. The chainmail situation has gone from uncomfortable to actively life-threatening. The rings are channeling water directly onto your skin in 1,000 tiny waterfalls. The rust, disturbed by all this moisture, is creating orange rivers that stain everything they touch. The weight distribution, already bad when dry, is now pulling you in whatever direction you lean. You're essentially wearing very expensive, very heavy water torture. Your wool garments have achieved a state of wetness that science hasn't properly named yet. They're not just wet, they're aggressively wet, seemingly drawing moisture from the air and concentrating it against your skin. The smell of wet wool mixed with rust, sweat, and fear creates a personal atmosphere that makes you gag. Your teeth are chattering so hard you're worried about biting your tongue off, which would at least give you an excuse to stop talking to these maniacs. The other Vikings are handling this about as well as you'd expect from people who consider suffering a recreational activity. They're slipping, sliding, cursing in Old Norse, and blaming various gods for the weather. One man's chainmail has gotten so waterlogged that he simply takes it off and abandons it, figuring the weight loss is worth more than the protection. You'd follow suit, but you can't get yours off without help, and everyone's too busy with their own survival. Hypothermia is setting in with disturbing efficiency. Your fingers have gone from cold to numb to a disturbing blue color that matches the lips of half the raiding party. Magnus, young and previously energetic, is now moving like an old man, each step deliberate and shaky. The berserkers, who stripped half naked for battle, are paying for their chemical-induced heat with interest. Ragnar is being basically carried by two other men, his glorious fury replaced by uncontrollable shivering. The beach, when you finally reach it, has transformed into a hellscape of churning waves and horizontal rain. The longship, previously your tormentor, now looks like salvation, if you can reach it. It's been pulled back by the tide and is bobbing violently in the surf. Men are forming human chains to load the loot, waves crashing over them with casual violence. Every third man gets knocked down, and several bags of hard-won plunder disappear into the sea. Your attempt to join the chain goes predictably wrong. A wave hits just as you're passing a particularly heavy sack, and suddenly you're underwater, tumbling in the surf with 30 pounds of wet metal trying to drag you to the bottom. The cold is so shocking that your body forgets how to breathe. You surface gasping, sans lutte, to find Ulf One-Eye shaking his head at you with the disappointed expression of someone who bet on the wrong horse. The water is brutal. Ice cold doesn't begin to describe it. This is the kind of cold that makes your bones ache and your organs contemplate shutting down. Your chainmail, now fully saturated, is actively trying to drown you. Each wave fills your mouth with salt water, and your body can't decide whether to shiver or seize up entirely. Other Vikings are literally turning blue, and not in a poetic way. Loading the ship becomes a Sisyphean nightmare. For every man who makes it aboard, another gets washed back to shore. The loot is being lost at an alarming rate. All that work in the monastery undone by the sea's greed. Someone makes an executive decision to abandon the heavier items, and you watch silver candlesticks disappear beneath the waves with a mixture of relief and dismay. Your share of nothing is getting smaller by the minute. When it's finally your turn to board, you discover that hypothermic muscles don't work properly. Your first attempt to grab the ship's side results in fingers that won't close properly. Your second attempt is interrupted by a wave that fills your mouth and lungs with seawater. The third attempt only succeeds because two Vikings grab your arms and haul you up like a wet sack of grain, dumping you unceremoniously among the rowing benches. You lie there, coughing up seawater, shivering uncontrollably, and realize this is still not the worst part. The worst part is that you now have to row back through this storm with muscles that have given up, hands that can't feel the oars, and a body temperature that would concern a penguin. Around you, other Vikings are in similar states, and Sigurd is shouting for everyone to take positions. The successful raid has become a survival situation, and based on how this day has gone, you're not optimistic about your chances. Your first swing in actual combat happens when you're least expecting it. You're still trying to get your frozen fingers to grip the oar properly when a Saxon warrior appears at the ship's side. Apparently some local Fyrd managed to organize a response. He's a farmer with a rusty spear and more courage than training, but he's also not hypothermic and wearing 60 pounds of waterlogged metal. His thrust misses you by inches only because a wave rocks the ship at the right moment. Your response is pure instinct and panic. You swing the oar like a club, catching him in the shoulder. It's not a killing blow. It's not even a particularly good blow, but it's enough to send him tumbling back into the surf. For a moment, you feel like a real Viking warrior. Then you notice your hands are shaking so badly you can barely hold the oar, and the other Saxons are wading into the water with agricultural implements and murderous intent. The beach fight is nothing like the monastery raid. These aren't monks. They're farmers and fishermen defending their homes, and they're angry. A man with what appears to be a modified fishing gaff nearly takes Bjorn's eye out. Another has a wood-cutting axe that he wields with the efficiency of someone who spent years splitting logs. They might not have proper weapons, but they have local knowledge and the desperate fury of people with everything to lose. You're trying to push off from shore when a Saxon grabs your oar. He's young, maybe 16, with the kind of righteous anger that makes up for lack of skill. You're engaged in the world's most pathetic tug-of-war, both of you slipping in the surf, when he makes the mistake of pulling too hard just as a wave hits. He goes under, you fall backward into the ship, and somehow this counts as your first combat victory. The actual sword fighting, when it happens, is disappointingly brief and terrifying. A Saxon manages to climb aboard while you're still recovering from your oar battle. He's got a proper sword, probably looted from some previous Viking raid, which adds insult to injury. Your borrowed staff against his blade is like bringing a stick to a knife fight, which is literally what you're doing. He swings, you block, and the staff shatters. The physics of it are shocking. The way the wood just explodes, leaving you holding two useless pieces. His follow-up swing is aimed at your head, and you do the only thing you can think of, fall down. It's not a tactical dive or a clever dodge. You just collapse backward in terror, and his blade whistles through where your neck was a second ago. What happens next is pure Viking pragmatism. While the Saxon is recovering from his overswing, trying to keep his balance on the rocking deck, Magnus stabs him in the back of the knee with a fish-gutting knife. It's not honorable, it's not glorious, but it's effective. The man goes down screaming, and 3 other Vikings finish him with the casual efficiency of men butchering livestock. You're still lying on the deck, trying to process what just happened, when Sigurd literally steps over you to engage another boarder. The fight rages inches from your face, boots stamping, blood spattering, men grunting with effort. You curl into a ball and discover that chainmail offers excellent protection against being accidentally stepped on by your own side. It's not heroic, but you're alive. The Saxons have brought hunting bows, and arrows start thudding into the ship's sides. One catches Thorstein in the shoulder, punching through his mail like it's made of wool. He responds by breaking off the shaft and continuing to row, because apparently Vikings consider arrow wounds a minor inconvenience. You huddle lower, using a dead Saxon as additional cover, which is both practical and deeply disturbing. The fighting prowess of actual Vikings versus your Hollywood-informed expectations is educational. They don't do elaborate sword dances or dramatic duels. They fight like men who've been doing this since childhood. Efficient, brutal, and unfair. They gang up on opponents, strike from behind, throw sand in eyes. One enterprising warrior is using a boat hook to trip Saxons in the surf. Another is simply holding enemies underwater until they stop struggling. Your contribution to the battle consists mainly of not dying and occasionally pushing Saxons away with broken pieces of your staff. When a wounded enemy crawls across the deck toward you, bleeding from multiple wounds and definitely dying, you scramble away in horror. Ulf One-Eye casually finishes him with the same expression he'd use for a difficult rowing stroke. The lack of drama in death is somehow worse than dramatic death scenes. The retreat is as chaotic as everything else. Saxons are wading deeper, trying to prevent the escape. Vikings are rowing with arrows sticking out of them, shields raised against the continuing barrage. Someone's dog, it survived, is barking at the Saxons like this will help. You're given a shield to hold over the rowers, which you do while trying not to think about the blood making the deck slippery. As the ship finally breaks free of the surf and the Saxon arrows fall short, you realize you've survived your first real combat. You're not sure survived is the right word. Accidentally remained alive during might be more accurate. Your combat record is 1 farmer hit with an oar, 1 teenager who fell in the water, 0 actual sword fights won. The other Vikings are comparing wounds and kills while you're just trying to stop your hands from shaking. The reality of Viking combat, you've learned, has nothing to do with personal glory and everything to do with efficient violence. It's not about being the best warrior. It's about being on the side with more warriors. As you help bail blood and seawater from the ship's bottom, you understand why Vikings traveled in groups. Honor is nice, but overwhelming numerical superiority is better. The dividing of spoils begins while you're still trying to wash Saxon blood off your hands with seawater. Sigurd calls for order, and suddenly the chaotic band of raiders transforms into something resembling a board meeting. If board meetings involve men with fresh wounds arguing over dented chalices, the loot, what survived the beach fiasco, is spread on a relatively dry section of deck, and it's even more pathetic than you thought. The distribution system is complex enough to require a law degree. First, Sigurd takes his cut as raid leader, a full quarter of everything. Then comes the ship owner's share, another eighth. Compensation for equipment lost, Thorstein's ruined shield, various abandoned chainmail, death payments for the 2 men who didn't make it back. Yes, 2 died and you didn't even notice, and shares for the wounded based on severity. By the time they get to regular shares, the pile has shrunk dramatically. Your position in the pecking order becomes painfully clear when distribution begins. The veterans count out silver coins with practiced ease while you wait, and wait, when your turn finally comes. Bjorn drops 3 small silver pieces and a bent copper ring into your palm with the expression of someone being far too generous. "For the Saxon you hit with the oar," he says, and everyone laughs. This is it. This is your Viking fortune. You couldn't buy a decent goat with this. The real education comes from watching others argue their cases. Magnus claims he deserves extra for saving your life. Twice, apparently, you missed one, which opens a debate about whether keeping incompetent raiders alive deserves compensation or punishment. Eric argues his navigation deserves hazard pay because the storm wasn't in his weather predictions. Someone else wants a bonus for first blood, which starts an argument about what constitutes first blood when the first Saxon you encountered drowned. The accounting system is surprisingly sophisticated. One of the older Vikings has a notched stick where he's keeping track of who owes whom from previous raids. Apparently, Viking raiding operates on a complex system of IOUs, future considerations, and multi-raid payment plans. Thorstein owes Ulf a half share from the Lindisfarne raid of 94. Hakon is collecting interest on a loan he made to Bjorn 3 summers ago. It's like violent merchant banking. You learn that your pathetic haul isn't unusual for a first-timer. New raiders often go several expeditions before earning anything substantial. Some never do, they die, prove incompetent, or simply give up. The real money is in the big scores: wealthy monasteries, merchant ships, or ransoming important captives. This raid was speculative, hoping the monastery had restocked since the last visit. It hadn't. The cheating is blatant and apparently traditional. You watch Eric palm a silver coin while counting the communal pile. Someone's definitely lying about how many candlesticks they recovered. There's a brief knife fight when Ragnar, coming down from his berserker high, realizes someone swapped his gold ring for a brass one while he was unconscious. The fight ends when Sigurd threatens to throw both combatants overboard, and everyone acts like this is normal raid dynamics. Your attempt to question the distribution goes about as well as expected. You point out that you helped in the scriptorium, fought on the beach, generously defining fought, and held a shield during the retreat. Sigurd listens patiently, then explains that you also lost a sword, ruined a shield, dropped multiple bags of loot, needed rescue several times, and contributed nothing to rowing because your hands were destroyed. By his calculation, you actually owe the raid money. The 3 silver pieces are charity. The social dynamics of loot distribution reveal the true nature of Viking society. It's not just about strength. It's about reputation, connections, and complex webs of obligation. Young Magnus gets a better share than you despite being smaller and younger because his uncle vouched for him and he comes from a raiding family. You're an outsider with no connections, no reputation, and demonstrated incompetence. Your share reflects that perfectly. Some Vikings are already planning how to spend their earnings. Talk of buying livestock, expanding farms, or funding next season's trading expedition. The successful raiders aren't just warriors. They're entrepreneurs using violence as a business model. Your 3 silver pieces won't buy much beyond basic supplies, which means you'll need to raid again just to break even on the equipment you lost. It's a vicious cycle that explains why Vikings kept raiding for generations. The tax situation is another surprise. When you reach home waters, there will be port fees, rulers' taxes, and various other hands reaching for their cut. The Jarl who controls the fjord takes a percentage, the king. If he finds out about the raid, wants his share. By the time everyone's been paid off, your 3 silver pieces might become 2, or 1, or a handful of hack silver barely worth mentioning. As you sit there, clutching your pitiful earnings while others count actual wealth, the reality of Viking economics hits home. This isn't a get-rich-quick scheme. It's a brutal, dangerous job with terrible pay unless you're already established. The sagas talk about warriors winning fortune and glory, but they don't mention the decades of 3 silver piece raids that came first. You're not Ragnar Lothbrok. You're an unpaid intern in the violence industry. The wound treatment begins as soon as the immediate danger passes, and you quickly learn that Viking medicine is less medicine and more creative ways to add injury to injury. Thorstein's arrow wound is still seeping blood, and the designated healer, a grizzled veteran named Orm, who claims to have learned his craft from a Sami shaman, approaches with implements that belong in a torture museum. First comes the diagnosis. Orm prods the wound with fingers that haven't been washed since the last raid, maybe ever. He sniffs the blood, tastes it, you gag, and declares it's not too deep but needs cleaning. His idea of cleaning involves pouring seawater directly into the hole, followed by something that might be mead but smells like it's been fermented in a dead whale. Thorstein grits his teeth and endures while you watch in horrified fascination. Your own wounds seem minor by comparison. Shredded feet, various cuts, bruises that map your incompetence across your body. But Orm insists on treating everyone, and soon it's your turn. He examines your feet with the bedside manner of a butcher evaluating meat. Saxons? He asks. Rocks, and you admit. And everyone laughs because of course you wounded yourself more than any enemy managed. The treatment for your feet involves scraping out embedded dirt with a knife that's seen better decades. No anesthetic, no warning, just sudden searing pain as he digs out pebbles and grit. You try to pull away, but Magnus holds your ankles with surprising strength while Orm works. The knife isn't even clean. It's the same one he used to eat breakfast. When you point this out, he laughs and says a little dirt builds character. Next comes the healing salve, a concoction that looks like pond scum and smells worse. It's made from rendered seal fat mixed with herbs that Orm keeps in a pouch that's probably never been washed. He identifies them for you: yarrow for bleeding, plantain for healing, something that might be moss or might be dried seaweed. There's also a suspicious fungus that he claims prevents wound fever, but looks more likely to cause it. The real horror show is Hakon's treatment. He took a blade to the thigh, and the wound is deep enough to need searing. Orm heats his knife in the brazier until it glows, and you realize what's coming. There's no ceremony, no preparation, just the sudden stench of burning flesh as he presses the hot metal to the wound. Hakon's scream is primal, but he doesn't pass out. Vikings, apparently, are too stubborn to allow themselves the mercy of unconsciousness. Your education in Viking painkillers is brief and terrifying, There's willow bark tea, which actually might help if it wasn't prepared in seawater. There's strong mead, which is both painkiller and disinfectant, at least in theory. For serious pain, there are mushrooms that Orm distributes with the care of someone handling gold. Not the berserker mushrooms. These are different, supposedly from the far north, and they make everything soft and distant. You decline, having seen what mushrooms did to Ragnar. The wound packing technique is something from nightmares. Deep cuts get stuffed with material to keep them open and draining. The material of choice. Moss, not clean. Sterile moss. This is moss scraped from trees, full of bark and insects and who knows what else. Orm packs it into wounds with the same casual efficiency you'd use to stuff a cushion. The idea is it prevents the wound from closing too quickly and trapping evil spirits or infection. The mythology and medicine are deeply intertwined. Some treatments are surprisingly practical. Honey, when they have it, goes on wounds to prevent rot. Garlic is crushed and applied to infected cuts. Sea salt, painful but effective, gets packed into deep wounds. But for every sensible treatment, there's something bizarre. One man with a head wound is treated by drilling a small hole in his skull to let the pressure out. He survives, somehow, though you suspect that's despite the treatment, not because of it. The psychological approach to healing is pure Viking. Complaining is weakness. Showing pain is acceptable only to a point. One young warrior who cries during his treatment is mocked so mercilessly, he tries to return to his rowing bench before the wound is properly dressed. The culture demands stoicism in the face of agony, which probably explains why so many Vikings die from preventable infections. They're too proud to admit something hurts until it's too late. Your feet, now packed with suspicious moss and wrapped in strips torn from someone's spare tunic, throb with every heartbeat. The healing salve burns worse than the original injuries, but you keep quiet, having learned that complaints only invite worse treatment. Orm's philosophy seems to be that if you're not screaming, you're not hurt enough to need attention, but if you are screaming, you need to toughen up. The medical supplies are running low after the beach battle. Orm rations his herbs carefully, saving the best for those most likely to survive. It's coldly practical. Waste nothing on someone who'll die anyway. You're relieved to receive treatment at all, even if it's perfunctory. Your survival potential has been judged adequate, barely. Others aren't so lucky. One man with a gut wound is simply made comfortable with strong mead and left to his fate. As you lie there, feet wrapped and throbbing, watching Orm stitch wounds with a needle that's been sterilized by wiping it on his tunic, you gain new respect for modern medicine. These men survive not because of their medical treatment, but in spite of it. The ones who live through Viking healthcare are either incredibly lucky or have immune systems forged in Valhalla itself. You're hoping for the former, because your modern immune system is definitely not prepared for whatever Orm just introduced to your bloodstream. The voyage home is when everything truly falls apart. The storm that was merely unpleasant during the raid has evolved into something that makes you understand why Vikings believed in angry sea gods. Waves tower above the dragonhead, each one threatening to be the last thing you ever see. The wounded are trying to row with injuries that would have them on medical leave for months in your time. You're trying to row with feet that feel like they're stuffed with broken glass and fire. Your position at the oar is a new form of torture. Every pull sends shooting pain up your legs from your moss-packed feet. Your hands, already destroyed, have transcended normal pain into a state of constant agony that your brain can't quite process. The salt spray in your wounds is like acid, but stopping isn't an option. The ship needs every rower to keep from being swallowed by the North Sea's fury. Hallucinations start around hour 3 of continuous rowing. Whether from exhaustion, pain, or whatever was in Orm's moss, you begin seeing things. The dragon head seems to be talking, offering commentary on your rowing technique. The sea serpents in the water look increasingly realistic. At one point, you're convinced your oar is actually a giant's leg bone and have to be talked out of throwing it overboard by a very concerned Magnus. The seasickness returns with vengeance. Your empty stomach, when did you last eat actual food, has nothing to give. But that doesn't stop it from trying. Dry heaving while rowing, while hallucinating, while your feet scream in protest, is a new low. Even for this disaster of a day, other Vikings are in similar states. One man is rowing while unconscious, muscle memory keeping him going. Another is crying silently, tears mixing with spray, as infection clearly sets into his wounds. Navigation becomes guesswork in the storm. Eric can't see sun or stars, and the waves have scrambled his sense of direction. Arguments break out about which way is home. Some want to beach on the nearest coast and wait it out. Others insist that's suicide. The Saxons will be watching for damaged raiders. The debate is settled when a wave nearly capsizes the ship, and everyone realizes stopping rowing means dying. Your infected wounds add a new dimension to the misery. The moss, predictably, hasn't helped. Your feet are swollen, hot, and producing colors that don't belong on human body parts. The smell is indescribable, rot and seawater and whatever fungi were living in that moss. Orm examines them during a brief rowing break and declares it's good pain, which apparently means you're not dying immediately. He adds more moss. You begin to understand why Vikings had such short life expectancies. The other wounded are faring worse. Thorstein's arrow wound has gone bad, and he's burning with fever while trying to row. His skin has a greyish tinge that makes him look like he's already halfway to Valhalla. Hakon's seared wound is weeping through its bandages. One man's head wound has left him convinced he's rowing in his father's fishing boat, and he keeps trying to cast nets that don't exist. Food and water become critical issues. The fresh water casks were contaminated during the chaotic boarding, mixed with seawater and blood. What little food remains is divided among those still capable of rowing. You get a rock-hard piece of bread that tastes like it's been soaked in bilge water, because it has. Chewing requires more energy than it provides, but you force it down between bouts of rowing and retching. The time distortion is maddening. Has it been hours, days? The storm creates perpetual twilight, and your exhausted mind can't track time anymore. You row in a fugue state, barely conscious, while your body operates on pure survival instinct. Sometimes you're not sure if you're rowing forward or backward. Sometimes you're not sure if you're rowing at all, or just dreaming of rowing while actually dying. Other ships appear and disappear in the storm, or maybe they're hallucinations. One looks like a Saxon pursuit vessel, causing panic until it vanishes in the spray. Another might be a fellow Viking ship in similar distress, but no one has energy to signal. A third is definitely not real, because it's crewed by what appears to be your deceased grandmother, who waves disapprovingly at your rowing form. The wounded start dying. It's gradual, then sudden. A man simply stops rowing and slumps forward. When someone checks, he's gone, bled out internally from wounds that looked survivable. Another goes over the side during a particularly violent wave, too weak to hold on. There's no attempt at rescue. The sea claims who it wants, and the living keep rowing because stopping means joining the dead. Your own grip on consciousness is failing. The infected wounds are spreading poison through your system. Your body is shutting down from hypothermia and exhaustion, and your mind is fracturing from the constant pain. You row automatically, mechanically, while your thoughts scatter like birds. Sometimes you're back in the monastery. Sometimes you're in your modern life, trying to explain to your boss why you're late for work. Sometimes you're nowhere at all, just existing as pure suffering in a hostile universe. The worst part is knowing this is just the beginning. When you reach shore, you'll need to survive the infections, the political fallout from a failed raid, and the shame of returning with almost nothing. Your 3 silver pieces feel like mockery in your pouch. You've destroyed your body, traumatized your mind, and committed acts that would horrify your former self, all for the price of a decent meal. As another wave crashes over the bow and you taste blood mixed with seawater, you make a promise to whatever gods are listening. If you survive this, you're never romanticizing Viking culture again. These aren't noble warriors living lives of adventure. They're desperate men in a harsh world, dying young and violently for scraps of wealth. The sagas lied. The History Channel lied. Everything about Vikings that seemed cool was actually just horrible suffering with better marketing. Land appears through the storm like a fever dream, and for a moment you're convinced it's another hallucination. But no, others see it too, and a ragged cheer goes up from those still conscious enough to care. It's not the home fjord, just some random stretch of Norwegian coast, but it's solid ground, and that's all that matters. Eric has managed to navigate through divine luck or pure stubbornness, and the ship limps toward shore like a dying whale seeking its final resting place. The landing is less triumphant return and more controlled crash. The ship grinds onto the shingle beach with a sound like breaking bones. Half the crew is too weak to even stand, let alone leap dramatically onto shore. You crawl over the side and immediately collapse, kissing the frozen ground with genuine devotion. The earth feels like it's spinning, your body still rowing phantom waves, and 3 silver pieces in your pouch, 2 feet full of infected moss, and one absolute certainty: you're never, ever doing this again. The survivors, and you use that term deliberately, drag themselves above the tide line. Of the 40+ men who left, maybe 30 have returned, and half of those are in various stages of dying. Your infected feet won't carry you, so you crawl up the beach like some primordial creature, leaving a trail of blood and moss. Other Vikings are in similar states. The mighty raiders of legend reduced to broken men dragging themselves through gravel. A local farmer finds you first. He takes one look at the beached longship, the scattered bodies, and the men trying to build a fire with shaking hands, and immediately sends his son running for help, not attacking help, helping help. Even hardened Norwegians recognize when their countrymen are beyond raiding and into humanitarian crisis territory. He brings blankets that smell like sheep and heaven. And you've never been more grateful for basic human kindness. The aftermath is a blur of fever and infection. Orm's treatments have failed spectacularly, shocking no one. And real healers are summoned from the nearest settlement. They take one look at your feet and immediately start removing the moss, muttering prayers and curses in equal measure. The cleaning process involves actual boiled water and clean instruments. Revolutionary concepts, apparently. You pass out from pain and wake up days later, feverish but alive. The reckoning comes slowly. Your 3 silver pieces are gone, used to pay for healing and lodging. Your equipment is forfeit. The borrowed items returned. Your own meager possessions sold to cover debts. The raid is officially a disaster. Sigurd's reputation is damaged. Some of the wounded will never row again, and the monetary loss far exceeds the pitiful gains. You lie on a straw pallet in some farmer's barn, reflecting on your Viking adventure. The other survivors aren't faring much better. Thorstein lost his arm to infection. Hakon will walk with a limp forever. Magnus, young and resilient, recovers fastest but carries new scars and a 1,000-yard stare. The berserkers pay for their chemical courage with bodies that can't regulate temperature anymore. Ragnar shakes constantly now, even in warm rooms. The cost of Viking life is written in flesh and sanity. Your modern perspective has shifted completely. These aren't romantic warriors living free lives of adventure. They're poverty-stricken farmers forced into violence by harsh climates and scarce resources. They're men who die young from preventable diseases, who lose fingers to frostbite and friends to pointless raids. The Viking Age wasn't an era of glory. It was centuries of desperate people doing desperate things to survive another winter. Word spreads about the failed raid. Other Vikings visit to hear the story, and you notice how they edit it in the telling. The pathetic monastery becomes moderately defended. The farmers with tools become Saxon warriors. Your fumbling incompetence disappears entirely from most versions. By the third telling, it's almost heroic. This is how sagas are born, not from truth, but from the need to make suffering meaningful. The real story is too depressing for good drinking songs. Recovery takes weeks. Your feet heal slowly, leaving scars that will ache every winter for the rest of your life. Your hands recover some function, but your grip is never quite the same. The psychological damage is harder to quantify. You wake screaming about Saxon monks and infected moss. The sound of waves makes you physically ill. The smell of wet wool triggers panic attacks. What they now call PTSD, Vikings just called the way warriors are. The social consequences are equally harsh. You're marked as unlucky, a failed raider who brought nothing but debt and dishonor. No warband will take you now. The locals tolerate you out of pity, but you see the looks. You're the cautionary tale parents tell children about what happens to weak men who think they can be Vikings. Your options are limited. Become a farmer, if someone will let you work their land, or try your luck as a trader, if you can scrape together enough to start. As you finally hobble out of the barn on scarred feet, able to walk short distances without screaming, you look at the fjord where longships prepare for summer raids. Young men boast about the glory they'll win, the wealth they'll claim. You want to warn them, but you know they won't listen. They need to believe the lies because the truth, that they're risking everything for the chance to steal candlesticks from monks, is too grim to face. Your Viking experience ends not with death in battle or glory in the mead hall, but with a slow walk to the nearest trading post where you beg for work as a porter. Your raiding days lasted exactly one catastrophic trip. Your Viking career spans roughly 36 hours of pure misery. The 3 silver pieces you earned are long gone, and all you have to show for your adventure are scars, trauma, and the absolute certainty that you wouldn't survive a day in a Viking raiding party because you barely survived one day, and it nearly killed you. The sagas won't remember you. History won't record your name. You're just another forgotten casualty of an age that was far more brutal than romantic. As you take your first steps toward a mundane but survivable life, you offer a prayer of thanks to whatever gods let you live through your own stupidity. Then you swear, on everything holy and unholy, that you will never, ever set foot on a longship again. And now, as our story comes to its close, Let your breathing slow and deepen. You're safe in your bed, far from the icy waters of the North Sea and the terror of Viking raids. Those hard men and their harder lives are 1,000 years gone. Nothing more than whispers in history books and echoes in old songs. Your feet are warm and whole, resting on a soft mattress instead of struggling through frozen mud. Your hands are clean and unharmed, not wrapped around splintering oars or desperate weapons. Let the images fade now, the longships disappearing into mist, the sound of battle growing distant and dreamlike. You survived your journey into the past, and now you're home again, surrounded by the gentle comforts of modern life. The storm has passed, the sea is calm, and you can rest easy knowing that tomorrow holds no raids, no rowing, no desperate fights for survival, just peaceful sleep and pleasant dreams, as you drift away from history's harsh realities into the soft embrace of night. Sleep well, brave traveler. Your adventure is over, and you are safe.